We are on an adventure to unite the stories and solutions of the pioneers, creating a better future for all. Together, we will journey to every continent, every country and community, and ask the question, what is the future you dream of? We will explore the blockers to us getting there, and we will ask, what will it take? What do we need? What do you need to create a future where we all thrive in balance and harmony with nature and each other? In this episode, we welcome Philippe, co-founder of Climate Farmers, visionary adventurers on a mission to scale regenerative agriculture through a community of practice for farmers and carbon credits. We dive into what is regenerative farming, soil health, the role that farmers play in maintaining healthy ecosystems. It's not the cow, it's the how, the need for a better subsidy framework, more transparent pricing through the supply chain, and more value being passed to farmers for their hard work. The challenges of the availability of land, and the need to create a movement of future farmers for our future generations. Philippe is deeply knowledgeable, and it was a pleasure to receive his hard-earned insights, which I'm now happy to share with you. Let's get into it. So, without further ado, I would love to introduce you to Philippe. Is that right? Philippe, the right way to say that?
Yeah,
Philippe, godfather, soon to be father, and co-founder of Climate Farmers. Hey, buddy, how are you doing?
Very good. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, really good to welcome you. So I suppose initially it would be great to receive a little bit of insight as to who you are, like what drives you, what's your what Climate Farmers is, just to give people a bit of a context of why we're having this conversation today.
Sure, happily. Les, what drives me? What drives me is definitely...
Who's Climate Farmers? Like, what is Climate Farmers as an initiative? Like, I think that's like, where are you from? What are you doing? I think is interesting, if that's okay, just to give people a bit of context as to you.
Sure. Rough background story, I guess, is German. You probably already figured this out on my slight accent. I grew up on the German countryside in a very agricultural context, 500 people village. Godmother, which had a very close relationship to me, was a farmer in the 6th generation. Saw a lot of struggles of farmers back then early on. And then I did what most people did. I went to the cities. I had the pleasure of working and living in Amsterdam and Berlin for about 10 years. Had also the luxury of always working in impact startups. So I always wanted to have meaning in the work that I'm doing. And luckily, I managed to do that. Mostly worked in the tech sector, among others for Fairphone. I loved city life. I ran a nightclub in Amsterdam for 3 years. I have a very strong music passion for electronic music, but I love nature even more. So I had a strong drive to go back to nature at some point. And so since 2015, me and some friends were looking into where we could settle in nature and could live together, where we could all afford something. And life brought us to Portugal, which is also where I'm sitting right now. And in 2017, me and some friends bought an old abandoned village here and a few hectares of land. We have around 20 hectares of land now total. And that's what got me back on the agricultural track. So I started reading about permaculture and then about regenerative agriculture. And back then, this wasn't as hyped as it is now. But there was already studies from Wageningen University, one of the leading agricultural universities, about the carbon sequestration potential of regenerative agriculture. And some of those headlines in there were, if the whole agricultural system would be regenerative, then we would take more carbon out of the atmosphere than we're putting in. And this got me down a rabbit hole, which I'm basically in now for 5 years. Initially, I did online research and basically found all of this, like agriculture is responsible for 24% of all greenhouse gas emissions, which many people don't know. So it has this very unique thing that one of the biggest issues could be turned into the solution to it. And that was just for me like, how is it that we know this, but that we're not acting up on this?
Yeah.
And then, exactly, the thing went on. And then I had the luxury that I could already work remotely back then, before COVID. And so I went on a 1-year journey. And I basically visited all of the regenerative farmers that I could find. It wasn't that many of them. I found 60 in Western Europe. And I basically went from farm to farm, spoke with the farmers, stayed with the farmers, and always asked them the same questions. Like, pretty similar to you, I guess. So how did you get into Regen Ag? Why do you think it's not scaling? And what can I do to help you? And the answers were almost always the same. The biggest issue, and this is probably a very surprising one to start this podcast with, it's not sexy to be a farmer. Young people are not going into farming because in society we don't give appreciation to farmers. And that led to the fact that the average age of farmers in the European Union is 58 years right now. And I mean, most of the listeners probably know this. In most European countries, you're retiring in your early to mid 60s. So just before your retirement, you're not going to change your ways drastically, right? And that means that we need to make it attractive to farmers, and we need to get young people into farming if we want to have a change in the agricultural system. And that's why
great.
so that was kind of the first thing that we did with Climate Farmers. I started Climate Farmers back then as a company. Then in August 2020, we have been working on this since 2019 together with Ivo. Ivo's a friend of mine since 10 years. We know each other through Ashoka, a network of social entrepreneurs. He also grew up in a farming context. So we basically both started diving into this topic together. And then the other feedback we got from the farmers is that they would love to know how Region Ag works in their context, and they would love to learn from other farmers and to learn from experts on the topic on what's working in their farm. Because we know about the 5 principles of regenerative agriculture. Everybody can watch Kiss the Ground, which is an amazing documentary out there, which gives a rough image, but it's very hard to figure out for farmers, how does it work in our context? So essentially, we had a non-profit, which is our Climate Farmers Academy, which provides a community, a sense of belonging for farmers where they can meet each other. We first did this on Slack, but Slack is very startup-y, not very farmer-friendly. So now we're on WhatsApp. Farmers are on WhatsApp. So we have local WhatsApp communities. And we started building a consulting arm where farmers can basically get consultants which help them in figuring out what the transition towards regenerative agriculture can look like for them. That consulting arm has consultants which are verified by farmers, because over the course of our time, the topic Region Ag received some attention, especially thanks to Kiss the Ground, I believe. And a lot of kind of consultants suddenly popped up, but they didn't really know what they're talking about. So usually the ones with the fancy websites are not the ones with the knowledge. And the ones with the knowledge don't have fancy websites because they're busy working on the fields. So we managed to find them through our farmers, and we collected all of them, and we basically helped to facilitate the process between consultants and farmers. And then another issue that the farmers have been flagging to us is what we call transition finance. So when farmers want to transition from conventional towards regenerative agriculture, they need to shift their focus from a focus on yield to a focus on soil health. And that focus on soil health also means that over a short term, let's say up to a 5-year period, you will have less produce because you're not using pesticides. So until you build up soil health, you might have some crop loss, and we need to cover those costs. And in order to cover those costs, essentially, we came up with a concept which was back in 2020, which is the carbon credits, which is essentially measuring and modeling the increase of carbon on the soil of farms. And then paying farmers for the carbon which they're storing in their soil through the regenerative practices. At this point, I think I would love to mention that there's many benefits towards regenerative agriculture. Increase in biodiversity or soil water storage capacity are all benefits to it, but society is not paying for it at the moment. So carbon is the one which companies are most willing to pay. So it's the easiest way to facilitate farmers to get paid. And back then, we applied to the Google Impact Challenge on climate, something I can highly recommend to any entrepreneur working on climate change. Very easy process, very straightforward. Somehow we got selected as one of 10 startups in the world by Google to support, and they gave us a grant of 650,000. Never asked any questions afterwards. They basically transferred us the money, gave us some coaching, and let us run, which was amazing. And with that, we could basically write a methodology for carbon credits, because we were quite worried back then about the voluntary carbon market being very, very flexible, very loose. So there's a lot of credits flying around which are not very high quality. So we wanted to show, hey, it's possible to do high quality credits. So we worked on with Wageningen University on this. We got this certified last year in September, and we're basically right now generating carbon credits for our farmers so that they have some kind of level of transition finance during the transition period. And basically everything that we're doing is driven by this desire to support farmers and to help farmers in the transition, and to showcase also that farmers should receive a lot more respect and love from society, because they are the ones which not only provide food for our tables, but which also could heal our planet through regenerating their soils, building biodiversity, and taking carbon out of the atmosphere, that being the most effective way that we have for that. I think there was
That's
already
great.
a bit of a longer introduction, so I will stop it here,
It's
and then we can dive into anything that you want to.
it's a great introduction, and I'm going to summarize, and then we're going to dive into some of those bits in a bit more detail. So, what I hear is that you're building a community of farmers to share best practice, to share how they might understand and learn and implement regenerative agriculture. And on the other side, you're supporting them with financing, but also supporting businesses in terms of carbon credits as well. So you're creating two sides of that marketplace. And I also noticed on your site that you put a lot of focus on experts in terms of being farmers, and you've got a lot of interesting people doing lots of great things there. So it feels like you're building this thriving community. And actually, many of them were, to your point about the age of farmers, a lot of those farmers were younger. And I think I see and sense a lot of this interest in regenerative agriculture is coming from sort of around about our generation, and perhaps now it's actually probably a little bit younger than us as well, which feels exciting. So, okay, that feels great. I would love to start with, as we dive in, what is regenerative agriculture? What makes it regenerative? And, if we could keep that relatively tight, but it'd be really good to get a good, clear, concise sort of what is regenerative agriculture?
Sure thing. If you want it tight, the easiest one is regenerative agriculture is agriculture that focuses on building up soil health.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the one sentence line. And then what that means is essentially context specific. So I think that's a very important thing to say, which is often neglected and which is also the tricky thing in scaling. What that means depends on the context. It depends on the weather conditions you have, it depends on the soil you have, it depends on what you want to plant. In the end, the person that knows this best is the farmer. So all that we do is support farmers with the tools that they need to be able to focus on that soil health. Because the issue is that in our agricultural system, this is not how we're encouraging farmers to go. We pay farmers just for produce. So essentially, the amount of produce is the main thing that counts, and for that you get paid. And it doesn't focus on what does the effect, how you get there. It doesn't focus on the nutrient density of the food. It doesn't focus on the side effects like killing biodiversity or releasing or storing carbon. So we have a lot of agricultural practices which are increasing the yield, but in the long run, they are depleting our soil health. For example, the practice of plowing or the practice of not just planting annuals, which you plant at the beginning of the season, then you harvest them, then you plow the soil, you release the carbon, and then you start all over again. Over the course of time of 10, 20, 30 years, this means you deplete your soil, and this means that you will let less yield in the long run and less nutritious food, which is exactly the problem that we're having right now. In regenerative agriculture, what you would be doing is you would be focusing on building a nice living environment for all the amazing microorganisms which are living below the soil. Very easy example is earthworms. Earthworms is incredible. They're doing an amazing job in basically loosening up the soil, transporting nutrients around, pooping, fertilizing the soil, but they're dying in the soil that we are providing for them. So we need to create an environment which is like a palace and like a paradise for earthworms, and then you are most likely regenerating your soil. Another good example is mycorrhiza or mushrooms. So what's happening in a healthy soil is that the plant is taking carbon out of the atmosphere through its leaves and through its basically above surface level. It stores some of the carbon in the plant and most of it goes in the roots. And then in a healthy soil, what you have happening below the surface level is you have something like a Turkish bazaar going on. So the plant is trading that carbon with other plants and with mushrooms, which are basically the tradesmen facilitating everything against sugar, against nitrogen, against all kind of things. And through that, we bring the carbon deep in the soil. And what happens in a regenerative soil, you basically increase and you make that market more and more intense. And you increase the facilitation and you don't disturb it. And then over the course of time, it grows and it's more and more intense nets. And maybe sometimes you have seen it in very healthy soils, you would have lots of little white fibers and hairs basically moving around. This would be these mycelium networks. And when you plow, you basically go down and you kick out the entire bazaar. And then you have to start all over again. So it's kind of, you have to build up the bazaar every year again, and it can never get to a thriving state. And
you can never build it. I mean, that doesn't make any sense, does it?
Yeah.
And so, okay, that's great to sort of understand the system or the ecosystem that is. And what about the practices of the farming? Like, what are some of the principles of those farming techniques or practices that would be adopted and perhaps would be different from I don't even want to say traditional. Why am I saying traditional? From the farming techniques that we've done over the industrial farming techniques. That feels much better.
I think this is also a very important thing to watch up. None of this is new, right? So most of this is indigenous farming practices. Any indigenous tribe would be building up soil health with their farming practices. Most of the damage that we have done is the damage that we have done in the last 50 to 60 years. So with the arrival of industrial farming and with chemical pesticides, fertilizers, which is very often products which have been used in the Second World War. And then in the Second World War chemical factories, we started producing our pesticides afterwards and putting that on our food. And then we're wondering that people are getting sick and cancer rates are rising. But that's a whole...
And the change in the way food is distributed, connected with, and it arrives at us as well. I mean, I think the other part of this conversation is food waste, for example, and the inefficiencies in the food supply chain that we have and the distances now that food travels, which is so different than it would have been even just 100 years ago.
Certainly. And luckily, there's some amazing people working on that topic as well.
On that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We will feature them of course, we'll feature them. Okay, so... I interrupted you, and so we were talking about the practices of farming, and
So I think there's many different examples and practices you can go into. As I said, Kiss the Ground gives a great general overview. I will pick up one example here, which is one that blew my mind, and I think that's very shocking and weird for many people, and that's cows. So cows have a very negative image in our society, and they're famous as being climate killers, right? So for me, it was the same.
It's not the cow, it's the how.
Exactly. I see you've been following me. So it's really a topic which I found fascinating, because I was vegetarian myself for 7 years for several reasons, ranging from animal welfare to climate change. And when I started diving into this topic and I started visiting farmers and speaking about it, very much based on the amazing work of Alan Savory and the Savory Institute, I started understanding that, as almost always, nature does not design species or animals which don't have a purpose. It just doesn't happen. Nature is a perfect designer and architect, where everything functions in symbiosis. What humans do is we interfere, we change things, and we basically mess it up. I'm using mess up because the other word is not very podcast friendly, but you can imagine. You could use a more drastic word here. So essentially cows...
Sometimes we should as well.
Yeah. So cows essentially are ruminants. Ruminants means they have a stomach which is designed to eat grass, just grass. Very simple example, similar to koalas eating eucalyptus, pandas eating bamboo. Cows should be doing the same thing. As, for example, buffaloes, which are still existing in the wild and which are showing similar behavior. So what you would have happening in nature is that cows would be relatively tightly packed together because there's predators. So from predators, as you would see probably buffalo herds, they're relatively close together. They eat off the grass, and then the grass kicks into a perfect symbiosis. It feels it's getting eaten by the cows. It feels the saliva, and then it grows back very strong. And through that growing back, again, the roots store massive amounts of carbon in the soil, more than trees, for example, would. So cows would do this, and then they would move on to the next field. And then they would be moving around, and they would not return to the same field for 3, 6, 9, for several months, essentially. So the grass would have enough time to recover. Afterwards, it gets eaten up again. The roots keep on growing stronger and stronger, storing more and more carbon in the soil. At the same time, through the poo of the cows and the trampling, etc., the ground gets fertilized, and we have a thriving ecosystem. Now, you could also start integrating trees into this, and then the trees would provide shade for the cows. They would also benefit from the poo, and you would have a beautiful ecosystem where you would have the animals running on grass with trees around them, which is what many of our farmers doing. For example, here in Portugal, we have the Montado system where you have beautiful cork oaks and you have pigs and sheep and goats and cows running underneath them. Now, what we are doing in our messed up agricultural system is we're taking these cows, we're putting them in stables, and we're feeding them corn and wheat and all kind of other things which they're not supposed to eat, which means they get sick, which means we have to give them antibiotics, which means we get unhealthy food from sick, suffering animals, which also for us have no nutrients and which also make us sick and suffering in the end. And these cows never get to see the outside. They live a horrible life, and we get bad products, and through their farting and their methane, they're also polluting the environment. What we should be doing is, and what we're doing with our farmers, we're helping them to set up a holistic grazing plan where we basically structure their farm into the different fields So we see how many cows they can have so that the cows can move on a daily basis and not visit the same field again for 3 months, for several months, essentially. And through that, you would be regenerating the soil, you would be storing carbon in the soil, and you would be producing a lot more healthy and nutritious meat or milk, depending on the product that you want to have. Now, obviously, you will not be able to eat the same amount of meat with that form of farming. Not every farmer that has now a stable has the amount of land that we would have. So we need to eat less meat, and we need to stop eating meat from industrial farming completely. But we could be eating meat from selected regenerative farms in a way that's positive for the animal, positive for the farm, positive for the planet, and positive for us. And this is essentially one example where we would be transitioning from conventional towards regenerative agriculture. While, of course, at the same time, we also have to start adjusting and we have to reduce the amount of meat that we're eating.
And I think it's that expectation that we either have minimal or much less meat, or maybe some mix between vegetarian, vegan, and then occasionally meat when it's of a better quality. That's sort of, after having moved around a bit and trying to experimented where I felt best, both for my body, but also for my impact on the planet and my care of nature and animals, like I felt like minimal meat felt like the space where I was probably inhabited best.
I call myself farmtarian now. So farmtarian.
A what?
A farmtarian.
Farmtarian.
So I only eat meat when I've been at the farm. And this means I usually eat meat, I would say 10 to 20 times a year. But when I eat it, then I really acknowledge what's been happening. I really appreciate it. And I also know that
and say thank you. And yeah, that feels true. There are some, I don't want to necessarily explore them now, but I want to acknowledge that there are challenges around cost of living and affordability there. But I think we will cover those types of topics. I don't think this now is the moment to dive into those. What role also does plants and that play? We recently, so last year I had a conversation with Philippe from Renature.
Great guy.
And a great guy doing some fantastic work, love what they're doing. And I think for them, it's interesting to notice like how they're adopting multiple different types of crop within the same field or area, for example. You talked about animals, but what role does that play in regenerative farming?
Again, it comes down to the context which you're operating in and what makes sense in the context of your farm. I'm, for example, slightly jealous that Philippe is getting to work in Brazil, where you have incredible systems of agroforestry and working with coffee and cacao plantations. Like, wow, we have decided we're working in, I'm not Brazilian, I'm German. So we're focused on Europe. So we're just operating in Europe. So we don't really use these beautiful coffee and cacao systems, but we can still set up agroforestry systems. And we can also set up crops in a way that are regenerating the soil as well. And here again, we have several principles. So for example, that you always keep the ground covered, that you always have a root in the soil. And I always compare it like bare soil. It's a bit like an Irishman lying in the sun. It's just not good. And again, everybody's just suffering from it. So you want to avoid it. So even after the harvest season, you would do something that you would call winter crops. That you basically have some crops which are in the soil in winter and some in the summer, and you make rotation so that you always have a green cover above the soil to protect the soil health below, and that you always have a living root in the soil so that the bazaar can keep on functioning. And then another thing that nature always wants is diversity. So you plant a diversity of crops which are functioning well together instead of just having one monocrop, which is something you would never see in nature. Nature would never design a system where it would just be one plant over a massive field. You would always see a range of diversity. So these are some of the principles that you're keeping in mind, essentially. And then what we're doing is we're always matching the farmers with consultants, which know how to operate in that context and which can then give recommendations what works in what context best.
Okay, that feels good. So let's have a mini break and have a conversation around where we dive into next. Like, I'd love to explore one of the topics that we've seen gain quite a lot of attention recently has been initially it was greenwashing, and then that extended to offsets and looking at like the credibility of many offsets and the choices that were being made as to where people were choosing to offset and how they were choosing to offset. And so I'm curious, I in the sort of hierarchy of elements that feel important to invest in, and soil, I feel is quite high up in that hierarchy. you've almost not got an immediate payback, but the benefits are there quite clearly, quite quickly. Whereas with trees, you sort of, if you plant trees, you have to wait a significant amount of time before you receive any payment. I mean, my personal view is that we should be investing in nature without needing those mechanisms. But if we are going to have mechanisms, then it feels good to understand that. And so where do you feel like soil lives on that decision-making hierarchy, I suppose, in terms of like, if I'm gonna spend my carbon budget, which even that feels weird, like somewhere, where am I going to invest it to get the most out of that investment? Could you talk a little bit to that?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the thing that I want to say, first of all, is there's a lot of amazing benefits towards regenerative agriculture. And it's quite unfortunate, I think, that carbon is the main one that I can use right now to get farmers paid. I would love to be able to sell biodiversity credits. But I can't.
Right. Amazing. Or just the holistic ecosystem benefits of like investing in the world that we live in that way. Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely.
So if I could snip my fingers and if I could change one thing about the world, it would be true cost accounting.
Me too.
The whole principle of true cost accounting makes just so much sense. And it's horrific how far away from that we are. So for those not familiar with it, in very short, it basically means that if you pay the price for something, you account for the whole cost of the production of that product. So this, at the moment, the main thing that we're paying for is the production value and the brand or whatever companies are deciding what you pay for the quality of it. But we don't account for what is the actual cost to the environment, to the planet, and to our health of the production of that good. So for example, I have a Fairphone. Fairphone is a sustainable smartphone company, but a Fairphone is more expensive, of course, than a comparable phone from Google or from Apple or so, because they're paying fair value, fair wages, and they're looking where the minerals are coming from. And right now, if I as a consumer want to buy a sustainable product, then I have to pay more for that because we don't fully account for those costs. In agriculture, the way how we're looking into this is that right now, we're only paying for the yield that the farmer is having. What we should be paying for is the positive side effects that that production has. So this means increase in biodiversity, increase in carbon, higher nutrient density, or even soil water storage capacity of healthier soils. In my hometown where I was coming from in Geilenkirchen in Western Germany, 2 years ago now, we had massive floodings in Germany and the Netherlands. The cost of that were 3.3 billion euros. We would not have had those costs, those floodings, those damages, and those sufferings if we would have healthy soils, which would have soaked up the water, which has been coming down. Unfortunately, we're not there yet. We're talking with insurance companies, we're talking with governments, we're running some pilots with Earthly on biodiversity credits, and I would love to get farmers, regenerative farmers, paid for all of these side benefits of regenerating soil and of building up soil health. Right now, I can't. And that's why we went for carbon credits. Because carbon is the thing for which a market exists. There's a market out there right now of the mandatory carbon market, and there's a voluntary carbon market. We are operating in the voluntary carbon market, which brings with it some issues. It's very highly unregulated. So basically anybody could make a piece of paper and could sell carbon credits, which is a massive issue which we're really worried about. But it also brings with it the benefit that we're selling our carbon credits for 50 euros a ton, which is a very high price. You can buy carbon credits for 5 euros a ton on the market. So by that, we're automatically avoiding greenwashing companies. Because if you just want to be able to claim a neutral carbon balance, you could just buy carbon credits for 5 euros a ton. What we are doing is we're saying we're selling them for 50 euros a ton because that way you actually get an economic value which helps farmers. And it's actually a meaningful amount of money for farmers to cover part of their transition costs. Unfortunately, they will not be able to cover the entire transition costs, but they will at least be able to cover part of it. And it's the amount of money which we're asking and where we're finding buyers for it. The main benefit that buyers are getting for that is a direct relationship with the farmer. So what I'm basically always saying is you adopt a farmer. So we would love to connect companies wherever possible with a farmer that's geographically close to them so they can actually visit the farm themselves and they can see the effect of the regeneration that's happening on that land. And they can see with their own eyes the positive benefit that they have with the carbon credit which they're purchasing from us, which is a big difference to, for example, the Vera credits which have been shown in the media in the last 2 weeks, where you don't really know what's happening with your money. So we want to connect people in Europe with local farmers, which they support. And it's not really an offsetting. It's more like you're compensating by supporting the farmer for storing the carbon in the soil.
Well, and also if I think the one of the main things that's caused the break in the food system, or the level of disconnect in the food system, is the multi-layers and between the farmer and the plate, for example. And also sometimes the opacity, like it's opaque or it's diffuse, those connections. So if you're working in the office or in an office of a food company and your supply chain is uncertain and you're maybe going through a wholesaler and beyond, actually you're disconnected from really truly connecting with those farms and that food. And so you're also there creating a deeper connection, a deeper sense of sensitivity, a deeper sense of empathy, which I feel is then felt, even if it's not like I'm taking a basket to the company. I feel like it still there's an emotional connection. We as individuals make up companies, don't we? So yeah. I feel there's an emotional connection. I think that would flow then through every element of the way that food arrived, or the way that food was communicated to us. And I think one of the things I've been exploring recently is trust. Mm-hmm. It's such a key element of choice, right? Do we trust something? And is it something that we want to choose? And also, is it something that we want to choose to put in our bodies, which feels like I don't think we think about that bit enough. And so I think that through connection, we create trust. And I think that feels like such a fundamental sort of through line in terms of that.
Certainly.
On a pure, and just quickly, because we've got lots of areas to cover, but on a pure, and it's okay if we don't know the exact answer to this, but where does investing in soil health or investing in regenerative agriculture, where does that fit if we were to have a ladder of here are the things that are the most investable places for us to put our carbon? Mm-hmm. And secondly, even at 50, is it 50 euros or 50 pounds?
50 euros.
50 euros probably.
Yeah.
Even at 50 euros, is that enough? And so, fairly short answers to that, but those two questions feel interesting to receive insight on.
I mean, the question is, what is enough, right? I mean, this is again the thing.
Sure. Yeah. Yes. Okay.
It's a voluntary carbon market. So the market is driven. I can sell what I can get, right? So I would love to sell a ton of carbon for 200 euros a ton, but I won't get the money because it's voluntary.
There's a different question. The question is, what should it be in order for it to create that fair, equitable, regenerative system? What number should we be? And appreciating that we didn't necessarily want to get to the number question about it being in a carbon market, but we happen to be there. One of the things I'm keen to do is to create a sort of sense of acknowledgement around the right level for a carbon price to be at, for example. And I'm just wondering, in your world, what that is in this instance.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
is it 200 euros, or is that just a number that you found?
So in order to, I don't have an exact number for you, because the number depends again on the context. It depends on the context of where the farm is. But generally, if we really want to see a massive switch of farmers from conventional towards regenerative agriculture, then we would really need to move more and more towards this true cost accounting system, where we're actually rewarding farmers for all of the positive side effects. Because until we are there, it will be very hard for farmers to do it, because financially they're very often with the back against the wall, right? So I would love to have something like a payment of, let's say, 500 to 1,000 euros per year per hectare for farmers, because then we would be getting to a point where they would be actually getting the similar amount of money or more for the ecosystem services which they're providing than they're getting right now from subsidies and produce. And I think this is another very shocking number in the European Union.
Nice.
60 to 80% of the income of farmers in the European Union on average is coming from subsidies. So we created an agricultural system where most farmers are not able to live off the produce which they're producing. They need subsidies in order to keep the farm profitable. Or in other words, farms are not profitable because we pay so little for the food that farmers are producing. That's messed up. That just makes no sense at all.
And so it doesn't make any sense at all. And so what is the blocker for that happening?
The blocker for that happening is...
What are the why is that not happening? Why is that not? Yeah.
So one of the blockers is definitely because we're not used to pay for food anymore. The amount of money that people are spending on food is a lot less than what it used to be. 50 years ago, it used to be half of our income. I think now it depends on the country, so don't quote me on the numbers, but it's somewhere between 15 and 25% in most countries. So that's one issue. And the second blocker is that farmers are receiving very little from the food money that we are paying. If you go in the supermarket and you are buying a product, then of that product that you are buying, again, the number varies from the product and the region where you are, but the farmer will most likely get between 10 and 30% of that money. That's messed up because most of the work has been coming from the farmer. But the main profit share right now is getting taken by the supermarkets, which are usually taking at least 50%, and the rest is coming from the food corporates. So that's the one issue. And the other issue is what we touched upon before. Farmers only get paid for the yield. They don't get paid for the ecosystem services. So on the one hand, farmers should get more of the money which they're getting for the yield. And as a consumer, you could be buying directly from farmers, which is something that I would highly encourage to do. Whenever I'm in a city for a longer period of time, I usually try to figure out how I can buy directly from farmers so that more money arrives for them. And the other part is society should be paying for these ecosystem services so that we don't just need the carbon credits.
And two questions there, right? But the first one, do we have a mechanism for that currently? Or is that something that we need to build?
A mechanism for which part of this?
Do we have a mechanism for rewarding farmers for their ecosystem, like the services they give to the ecosystem? Is that a centralized thing that would come through from, for example, government or local government? Or is that something how do we, it's okay to highlight the challenge, but we have to think about what the solution might be, right?
Yes, totally. I mean, I have a pretty long list of solutions that will be working here. But we don't have it right now. So right now it doesn't exist. But one way could definitely be also the subsidies of the European Union. And this is insane numbers. I think it's 440 billion euros, which are giving out through the Common Agricultural Policy. Most of that money is given out based on the size of the land. So you get X amount per hectare. And then you get a bonus if you grow this, and you get a little bonus if it's organic. But that's it. We don't look at what is the effect on the land. I would love for those subsidies to be given out based on the farmer showing that he or she is regenerating the land. So we could be saying, for example, if you can show that you're building up soils and you're building up biodiversity, then you get X amount of money. That money is available. It's just the way how we're giving it out right now.
It's the way we're choosing.
It's the way how we're choosing to incentivize farmers on what they're doing. So farmers are sometimes even just doing nothing on the land, and they're just using it to get their subsidies. Because some of the times the subsidies are more money than the actual money they're getting for the produce. So the whole system is rotten from the very core. But some of the easy fixes that we could be doing is literally be rewarding farmers for ecosystem services. On the one hand, by subsidies, and on the other hand, by society, by paying more money for produce which is coming from goods which are benefiting all of us.
And that, I'm interested in systemic solutions that feel like keys to unlock things where actually the change that's required is quite small. Well, it's not small, but it's actually quite small. So just a change in the framework with which the money from the EU is distributed to farmers would enable that or empower that sort of change, wouldn't it? And it'd be interesting, not necessarily here, but it'd be interesting to explore what that framework should look like. And I would say actually the whole of this, we will summarize the action points and takeaways from this call and provide them for people to be able to access and dive into as well.
Amazing.
The challenge of farmers not receiving, I don't want to say the right, but an appropriate amount of money that, so if I buy butter or I buy milk or I buy a carrot, and the amount of money that then actually makes it to the farmer being smaller than we're saying that we think it would be necessary for them to have. How do we change that?
Transparency. It would all be about transparency of the supply chain, of basically saying, hey, how much of the money of the product that I'm buying is ending up in the pocket of the farmer? Relatively easy. Again, we don't have very transparent supply chains right now. Well, we don't know the profit margins. We don't know who takes what cut. And I would love to live in a system where I go to the supermarket and I can scan a product. And on the one hand, I would love to see what is the nutrient density of that product, how healthy is that product actually, and who is earning on that product. And I mean, it's totally fair that a supermarket takes a cut for the risk of providing space, of having rent, etc. And it's totally fair that a company takes a cut and that the processor takes a cut for all the steps that they're doing. But the way how these cuts are distributed right now, they are just completely detached from the reality of the work that is getting put in. So we would need more transparency in our supply chains, and then we would even be able as producers to make the purchase that we want to make. And I think there's a few projects running out there right now. There's Du bist mein Chef, which is like you are the boss, I think, in English would be the translation, which is basically looking exactly like that. So there are products already out there which are paying more money to the farmers and which are being more transparent about how much the farmers are getting from the products which are being sold. And the other part is basically just more direct supply chains to farmers, where you also know how much money is going to the farmer because you're having a direct relationship with the farmer. It's all these things about farmers being so detached from society, and we are so detached from where our food is coming from that we're not able to determine anymore where does the money go that we're spending. And I would love to be able to know more where my money goes and what happens with the money that I'm spending.
Yeah. So let's dive into data in a moment. I feel, at Future Planet, we have an ecosystem perspective. And from a systemic, if systems change is often ecosystems, or always ecosystems, and always interconnected. And it's interesting to hear, and to as you're sharing about how profits are distributed or shared in transparency, what's arriving is the last conversation I had with Catherine Howarth from Share Action, who is talking about how you can engage with the governance of businesses to change the way that they, for example, will structure themselves, or whether they will pay their employees a fair wage. And now I'm talking beyond what they do, but I'm giving examples that are coming from specifically from me. Like in that instance, like the governance of how a business is governed, how they view how they distribute profits, whether they have a triple bottom line or whether they just purely look for profit in a financial sense, is an unlocker in determining whether you would then have transparent and fair pay to farmers. And it's so curious to notice that these are all of our worlds, even though somewhat sometimes separate, are actually totally interconnected in terms of how we might unlock this change. I have one, before we go into the data, and I think that's important from the transparency perspective. How do we, regenerative farming feels niche at the moment, and it's growing, and it's something that's close to my heart and close to many of our hearts. But how do we approach it at scale? Like, I guess I'm talking, if I was playing devil's advocate, and it's not necessarily my view, but if I was someone playing devil's advocate, I might say, well, we can't get enough food if we use regenerative practices, or it's too expensive for too many people to be able to afford to buy it from regenerative, or I don't live by a farm shop. Like, how do we, like, what's our word? What are words we might share around that give us a sort of counterbalance to that?
First of all, we can easily supply the planet with just regenerative agriculture with enough food. It's definitely not an issue that we have of being able to farm regeneratively. We don't have enough meat from regenerative agriculture, but food from regenerative agriculture is definitely more than enough there. So there's already studies that show that the yield per hectare on average over the course of time from regenerative agriculture is higher than from conventional, or let's say industrial agriculture. One of the reasons is that because of crop loss due to climate change. So through regenerative agriculture and through healthier soil, you have healthier plants which are more resilient to pesticides, which are more resilient to plagues, which are more resilient to general effects of climate change, such as, for example, also droughts. So we would actually have higher yield once we went over the initial transition period. So that is definitely the case. Another thing is also the nutrient density of the food that we're eating nowadays is way less than what it used to be 50, 60 years ago. Again, because of the way how we're doing our farming, there's not a lot of nutrients in the soil, there's not a lot of nutrients in the plants. That means that if you buy an orange nowadays, you have 1/6 to 1/8 of the nutrients that you had before. If you have regeneratively grown produce, you will have more nutrient density. And nutrients is in the end what we want. It's not the amount of food, it's the amount of nutrients that we're getting from the food that we're eating. So we would actually be able to get more nutrient-dense food, and we get our nutrients easier from regeneratively grown produce. So that's the one thing. And the other thing is bringing us back again to accounting for the whole system of what is happening on the land, what is happening on the soil, and of paying for that which is happening and not just for the produce.
Yeah, that's really clear. So I recently read a post that you wrote about one of our blockers being data. I think that's true. Is that correct?
That's definitely an issue, especially in Europe. Yeah. So one has to say here in Europe, this is where we are focused with climate farmers. And there are already studies from the United States, it pains me, but what's leading there. I think the food system is more messed up. So people started getting into regenerative agriculture even earlier. So they are ahead of us. And the same is for Australia. So we have studies on nutrient density. We have studies on yield, but they're mostly coming from outside of Europe. And we're currently working with some research institutions such as Wageningen to generate studies from European soil.
That's helpful. So what are the other blockers? We've sort of moved around from different areas, but one of the things I'm keen to do with this podcast is to showcase the solutions that are in that future that we can all thrive within, to look at what some of the blockers are, but then also to look at how we unlock them as well. And what, my big question is, what will it take? What do you need? And I think then for us to call in those things that we need so that we can receive them. So we've talked about some of the blockers. Do you feel like that's all of them, or do you feel like there are other blockers towards that regenerative future that we have?
No, I mean, one major blocker is definitely that we as a society need to start valuing farmers again. We need to make it sexy to become farmers, because as I pointed out before, average age of farmers in the European Union is 58 years old. They will all go into retirement soon. We're running into a massive crisis in the next 10 years if we don't make it more attractive for young people to go into farming. How many people do you know that go to university or go to high school and that are like, I want to become a farmer? That doesn't happen. People want to be entrepreneurs. They want to be consultants. They want to be podcasters. They want to be DJs. They don't want to become farmers. Why is that? Because we as society are not valuing it. On a Tinder date, you would never write on the first match, I'm a farmer, because that's not sexy. And we need to make it attractive. We need to make it attractive for young people to go into farming by giving appreciation to farmers and by showing people that being a farmer is cool. Being a regenerative farmer is even cooler. And that's the first step, that we need to make it attractive for young people to get into it, because otherwise we will not have people growing our food. And if we don't have people growing our food, then we can forget about everything else. So that's one.
I love this. This feels true. I would just say I know some very cool farmers, and I see people moving into this as a movement. And I come from a farming background, so I'm not just a podcaster. I choose this, but actually, I feel like this plays an important role. For example, right? Like, I think, as well as having farmers, I think we need farmers to tell their stories. We need to be more open about what we're doing. We need to create the connection as to why it might be good to be a farmer, or what the benefits of being a farmer are, or how it feels to be in connection with nature. And I feel like that's arriving. I feel like that feels like it's arriving to me. I think there's probably, what I would say is, we need momentum around that movement, because even just in the last 2 to 3 years, look at our journey. We both started in music, and now we're doing something completely different, right? Like, I think, in the last 2 to 3 years, we've seen a lot of momentum around this. And also, I don't know, certainly if you look at my Instagram feed, like a culture of change around how we're spending our time and what we're valuing. But it definitely feels like there's another further step change, isn't there, to be made in terms of like that next generation of farmers. And you'll be much closer to that than I would be. But I just wanted to have a big shout out to some farmers that are in my mind right now that I think are doing a great job already.
Same here.
I'm sure, right? Because it's your community, so I'm sure. So, okay, so we've talked about the challenges of not enough money going to pay for the whole ecosystem benefits that farming produces. We've talked about the challenges of not enough money being paid for the produce in terms of the proportion that farmers are contributing to that. We've talked about more people needing to arrive into farming, and also more people to be comfortable and aware of regenerative farming techniques in order to scale that. And we've talked about the challenges around data and sharing more data and being open and transparent in supply chains as well. Does that feel like a complete set of what we're looking at here in terms of the landscape? You're nodding your head. You're not nodding your head. You're shaking your head. But what else would you add to that? I feel like this is a good opportunity to ask you further.
Sure. The list is unfortunately longer. Another issue which we're running into, let's say and I agree with you, right? We're already having the situation that it's becoming more attractive, and especially regenerative agriculture is appealing to a lot of young people, which is amazing. We get a lot of people writing us, which want to join the team, which are interested in becoming regenerative farmers. And now we have the next issue, access to land. If we're looking, for example, at the Netherlands,
that was arriving.
1 hectare of land in the Netherlands costs 80,000 euros.
What?
1 hectare. The amount of farms, most of the farms that we are working with are in the several hundreds of hectares, because this is what you need, for example, in order to do regenerative grazing and also to grow crops. So we can have lots of market gardenings, which is basically larger veggie patches and professionally organized veggie patches, which can supply the cities with beautiful vegetables on half a hectare, 1 hectare, and can also sustain 1 or 2 families. This is happening. But as soon as we're looking into the larger crops as corn, wheat, maize, etc., then we need to have larger scale farms. And it's very impossible for people who are not coming from a farming background to get access to this. So I would love to see something happening like either private or public financial institutions providing land to young farmers, which then say, okay, I get this land, maybe for affordable rent or cheaper rent, and then I have to showcase that I'm regenerating. So farmers basically get access to land, young people that want to get into farming, take a course, are ready to become regenerative farmers, have the skill set to do it, have the mindset to do it, but then they don't have the land to do it. We should be able to give them the land, and then they get the land, and they can farm, and then in exchange for the cheaper rent, or the free rent even, they have to show that they're actually regenerating the soil and are actually having a positive benefit for society.
I love that. And you have the benefit of coming from the German society where you run your football clubs differently, you retrain in your skills differently. So there's sort of an ethos around that feels like, of course, that's coming from someone that's a German. I feel like, but I'm curious as to how, a topic to explore would be how that would be possible. But I love the idea of it, and I think accessibility is such a key area. And I think what arrives for me there is that's also connected to wealth and the disparity in how wealth is divided, and the fact that certainly in the UK, land is used as an asset and a way of passing on money through generations.
Yeah.
And so therefore this idea of holding on to land. And I would say there's lots of people that are looking at how they farm regeneratively, but having, you're right, new farmers having access, or new enthusiastic people having access to land. I can see that being a challenge. Okay, next on your list, let's go.
Next one, and a big issue that we're seeing as well is initial financing of the transition costs. So let's say a farmer has decided he or she wants to transition and adopt more regenerative practices, then that comes with initial costs. For example, if you want to create a proper transition plan with a consultant, that consultant, of course, needs to get paid for, right? So this is an issue because many farmers don't have cash. They have assets, but they don't have a lot of financial cash flow. They sometimes can't even afford the consultation, even though it's in the lower thousands, let's say. And then you also potentially need to get, if you want to do, for example, regenerative crop growing, you might need to get new machinery, like the direct seeder or low-till drill. These machinery costs money again, and most farmers have already debt. So what we're trying to do, for example, is to pre-sell the carbon credits, so that we model how much carbon the farmer's likely going to store, and then we say, okay, we take a pessimistic modeling, and we try to pre-sell that in order to provide financing to farmers upfront, because they can't cover the initial costs. And that's a massive issue that we're facing there as well.
Yeah, but that actually feels like a fairly solid way of doing that. And you could see how financiers would scale that. Like you could see how it's funny, isn't it? In our movement, we've seen a lot of money come in from VCs because it's an opportunity to invest, whether it's a technological solution or something similar. And there's a reasonable amount of money that's available for people that, for example, solar lanterns or something like that in those areas. But I think there's big gaps in the funding that's available for this transition, like big gaps. And it's areas like this, and we see it in our community as well. It's often like things that are relatively intangible, or not intangible, but like you couldn't immediately say, oh, that's going to be really exciting, you're going to make a massive return, or like you can invest in something that's going to scale, or there are so many elements of this transition where we need money of different types, but where it's a different type of money or different terms around the money in order to scale the level of transformation that's required. And I think, because I'm thinking about what you're doing there, and I wonder. Actually, recently I was listening to different people talk about their net zero transition plans and how they were funding them. Many of them in large, some of them in large businesses and others as well. And there we're seeing like interesting funding instruments arriving. For example, aligning net zero goals with loan rates and things like that. So I think there's definitely stuff that's arriving there, but it'd be interesting to see how we would scale that. I think that the challenge there is finding credible partners to scale.
Exactly.
What arrives to me is I wonder about farmers' banks, which traditionally I think you find more in Europe than perhaps in the UK. But that's sort of, I guess, I don't know about Credit Agricole, but farmers' banks like that, and whether there's something there that could be done to scale that. And I don't know if you're looking at that. It seems like you're starting that, but like, yeah.
So we are talking with some insurances and some banks as well, but the problem is also farmers have often a lot of debt already. So ideally, I would love to put more debt on them, but to rather say, okay, we provide them a financing, ideally a 0% loan, or that companies are willing to pre-purchase carbon credits for them, or that companies are willing to make a commitment to buy their produce for a premium price already for the next years, so that farmers get stability and that they get out of the debt, which they very often in already.
It actually goes back
further into debt.
Yeah, and absolutely. It actually goes back to your subsidy question, actually, because this is, if we choose to look at this as farmers investing in whole ecosystems, then it goes into that collective society chooses to fund it, which I think we call government, but like whatever. Like, but if we could choose exactly, if society could choose where our money went, that's maybe what we would choose to put it in collectively.
Hopefully.
Okay. Wouldn't that be amazing? That's something that definitely we should cover. Okay, so next, I feel like maybe we'll explore this list until you say to me, oh, do you know what? There's no more things on this list, and we'll just see what comes out, if you're comfortable with
I think I have one more, which I would love to highlight.
Well, that's great.
And then I think
nice.
we cover most of it. And also time-wise, I think it's a good timing.
Sure.
Another interesting one, which I didn't think about before until working with a lot of farmers, processing facilities. It's a massive issue.
Processing facilities.
Yes. So essentially what has been happening for many things between what's harvested on the farm to us eating it, there's steps in between. And in our, capitalist system, let's say, what has been happening is all of the smaller mills, the smaller processors, smaller slaughterhouses, etc., have all been disappeared in exchange for massive ones, which are then having lower costs and which are then taking care of everything. But now these massive ones, they're not able and not willing to make separate processes for the regenerative ag produce and the conventional produce. So we have a massive issue. And now there's slowly, some things are popping up. But essentially, we would need to decentralize this again and have more localized, more small scale, more traditional processing facilities again. One example again that we have here, a beautiful example, is here in Portugal, where a lot of our regenerative meat farmers had a massive issue with basically getting the animals are living a beautiful life. And then at the end of their life, they get brought to a slaughtering facility where you already have the smell, the energy and everything of the suffering of the other animals. So it's a very horrible death. And now we have these three sisters, which is essentially three sisters, literally, which are three female butchers, which are going to the regenerative farmers and which are doing butchering on the farm. And basically have a mobile slaughtering facility so that the animals get killed on the farm without a big interaction there and without a suffering taking place. And the same we would need for corn, for wheat, for all kind of other produce to go back to the traditional ways and to localize processing facilities so that we can actually process the regenerative produce.
That's a similar challenge to that which is in the zero waste sector in terms of processing, washing. You need someone to step up and help to build that sort of ecosystem. I suppose it's the same as in EV as well and charging points as well. There's sort of leadership required from significant people to be able to implement that at scale. I think probably would be most. That feels super helpful. I feel both full and factually aware now, which feels good, and I hope the listeners do as well, and feel ready to summarize that and to get down those action points, but also hopefully over time build some of the solutions that we've been talking about into those action points, and if we can help in any way we can in terms of connecting you to people in our community, we'd be very happy to do that. Do you feel like that you have, would you like to share anything now, anything else? Like I'd welcome you to share anything else, like either a call to arms or a call to action or perhaps something that you feel like you hadn't shared, like
No, I think we are living in a very exciting time right now, right? I mean, I think we have a lot of challenges ahead of us, but at the same time, the solutions are also in front of our face and our nose, essentially, right? And I think it's great to have people like you who are broadcasting some of the solutions and educating the audience. And I have to say, I feel blessed and very happy about being able to be active in the regenerative agriculture field, because there's a lot of amazing other companies and people working on these solutions. And on many of these things are being tackled. So I feel like there's a growing movement, and I feel like things are going in the right direction. And I would just really welcome everybody to get active, because in the end, that is very much what I'm seeing. The awareness, I feel, of climate change reality and crisis reality is rising. And what I would love to see more is people stepping into actions. Like we were also starting step by step. We didn't know what we were doing at the beginning, and then things started rolling. So I'd motivate anybody to just start becoming active, and everybody has a role to play. And if you're in a corporate, if you're in an FMCG company, maybe you can start advocating for more regenerative produce in your supply chain, which will make more sense for the company in the long run anyways. If you're working in a company that's thinking about compensating for CO2 emissions, maybe you can do something there. If you're a private person, maybe you can start supporting a farmer. I think everybody has a role to play in this, and it's just about all of us getting active and starting acting up on that role.
That feels true. That feels totally true. I really love that. I think, recently I was asked at a conference, like, what can I do? I don't work in a role where I'm responsible, but I think even just participating, being engaged, sharing, amplifying stories, being vocal, communicating, like highlighting things, making different choices, it all align with what you're sharing there. Like, I think there are things that we can do that sometimes we don't know the impact, but this is like the story of the butterfly, right? Like sometimes that has huge impact. So it's climatefarmers.org. What's at the end of that? Or .org. Great. Yeah. Thank you. So you can visit climatefarmers.org. And Philippe, thank you so much. What a pleasure. And, my role is merely to amplify and to share and to showcase people that are making the change happen. So it's indeed a great privilege to welcome you and to feel like I've received a richness of insight and knowledge through the last hour. I feel deeply lucky indeed. And I look forward to connecting again soon. Thank you.
It was a pleasure to chat. Thanks for the invite, and thanks for the important work that you're doing with spreading all these amazing, basically messages out there.
Thanks, man. Yeah. Together we can, right?
Exactly.
Together we can. Thanks, buddy.
Ciao.
Please like, rate, and share this widely on your social channels. The more people that we can welcome to join us on the journey and support the change makers we champion, the faster we can combat climate change, battle biodiversity loss, and co-create a future we can all love. Thank you. Together, we can.